It is now time for The World This Week, and we're going to be discussing the top stories of the past 7 days with a panel of journalists. They are Anne-Elisabeth Mute, she's a columnist at the Daily Telegraph. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Christopher Dickey is Newsweek magazine's Paris bureau chief. He's also a columnist at the Daily Beast. Hi there, Christopher. George Gazolius, to my left, is a journalist at AITV. He's also a professor these days at the American University of Paris. Good to have you with us.
Thanks.
And Patrick Vignal is a senior correspondent for the French service at the news agency Reuters. Good to have you with us as well. Well, straight then to our first topic. And this week brought a huge escalation in violence in Syria. The government came down hard on rebels in Damascus before bringing in reinforcements to Aleppo. State media announced there would be the mother of all battles in the country's second city, forcing thousands of terrified residents to flee their homes. Well, France, the United States and Britain all warned of a slaughter and a massacre in the city that's home to more than 2 million people.
The concern that we will see a massacre in Aleppo, and that's what the regime appears to be lining up for. This is another desperate attempt by a regime that is going down to try to maintain control, and we are greatly concerned about what they are capable of in Aleppo.
So a lot of hand-wringing from world leaders, but all diplomatic efforts to end the conflict in Syria have, of course, failed. And the former head of the UN mission there said it could be a while before peace returns to Syria.
The belief that should Bashar disappear, all the problems will be solved is simply a blind alley. It can also be said that it is impossible to imagine a future in Syria where the current people in power remain in power. So in that view, it's just a matter of time before this regime collapses.
Christopher Dickey, Aleppo, of course, isn't the capital, but it is the commercial hub. It's hugely important, and it's unlikely the regime is going to give this up without one hell of a fight.
No, but I'm really wondering what the rebels think they're doing there. I mean, they've gone in there. Their commander told the Daily Beast yesterday, "We can't hold those positions. We're going to have to fall back." So, are they inviting a massacre? I'm beginning to think that may be what they're doing. Because they need something to break the impasse internationally. They can't do it by taking over territory. They don't have the resources to do that up against the regular army. There have not been mass defections in the regular army, certainly not in the officer corps. The regular army is getting more guns, more helicopters, more heavy weapons from the Russians. So I think that this is a huge gamble by the rebellion. Where they basically want to stand toe-to-toe against the army just long enough to get a hell of a lot of people killed and cause the international community to step in.
And George Gazolius, we've heard still no appetite from the international community to intervene. Do you think that's changing?
Well, they are intervening. They're just not intervening militarily. I mean, the rebels wouldn't be anywhere without the help of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, France, and the United States, and Turkey especially. Yeah, I don't know what they're playing at. I mean. They're like mad scientists saying, well, if I do this, what happens? I mean, Lebanon risks to fall. We got the Kurds now moving. Turkey threatening to invade Syria to fight the Kurds. This is just madness. And you're right. They cannot beat the regular army and the rebellion. I mean, we pretend as journalists to be telling people what's going on in Syria, yet the White House is criticizing the CIA because they don't have the information on who the rebels are, what their motivations are. So how can we pretend to be knowing what's going on there? The whole thing is a mess, and I'm really worried if it continues where it will go. But I ask one question. If last year, when the Russians proposed that the opposition and the government and the international community get together around a table, and the West accepted that proposal, where would we be today?
Patrick Vignal, did you see the conflict take on more of a sectarian angle this week? I mean, various things going on, of course. We've got the Christians going back to Iraq. We've got talk that the Alawites might actually end up heading back into the mountains, creating their own state. I mean, there's all sorts of speculation flying around at the moment. But are we seeing that? Are we seeing these religious and tribal and ethnic lines rearing their head more and more?
Maybe. I mean, the opposition's main problem is that they are fractured and they don't have a leader or anybody who could act on a caretaking basis if there were to be a transitional period. And that's part of the problem. There has been maybe something over recent days, which could be interesting, it could be maybe not a turning point, but could be interesting, is the role of Manaf Tlass, the former ally and former close friend of Assad, who has defected.
And a Sunni.
Exactly. So he represents like a community that makes up 60% of the population, and he's trying to emerge as an opposition leader. He was in Saudi Arabia, then he went to Turkey. Maybe that could be the beginning of some leader emerging in the opposition, but there's a long way to go still.
Right, and Elizabeth, as we've just heard from Robert Mood there, the head of the Observer Mission, the former head of the Observer Mission who's come back, he says this could take an awfully long time. He sees the fall of the regime as inevitable, but it could take an awfully long time.
Yes, and it's very obvious that the regime practically has no choice, because we've seen what happened to other leaders who tried to negotiate or who tried to give a bit of leeway, and they got massacred in the most horrible way. So it's really a question of it's kill or be killed. I'm not going to defend Assad, of course, but Assad's point of view is, rather than the perspective of ending up on a stretcher in a courthouse like Mubarak in Egypt, or spared to death after being found in some sewers for Gaddafi. There's no point in not giving his all, and he's got allies. He's got the Russians, who've got real interests in who've got their warm water port in Syria, who will not let go, and who do not want the spread of Islamism in their own country in places like Chechnya, and therefore will help. And he's got the Saudis and the Qataris, who in some ways are fighting their proxy war against Iran on this one. It's a situation in which it can last for quite a long time.
And Christopher, I spoke to the spokesperson for the Syrian National Council, the main opposition body, earlier this week, and she admitted that militarily the rebels can never outgun the regime forces, but what they have to do is wait for this regime to collapse from within. They have to wait for more defections, they have to wait for more pressure, and of course, as Anne-Elizabeth was just saying, that support from Russia has to weaken at some stage.
I don't know why we would think it would weaken it at any state. I mean, also, this is going to be a war that's going to be waged by the Syrian government very much the way Russia wages its counterinsurgency campaigns. I mean, we could see Aleppo turned into Grozny, where you bring in a lot of heavy weapons and you just shell the hell out of the place until your troops can move in. Because what you don't want to do if you're the government forces is you don't want to send a lot of guys in on foot to be picked apart by snipers. So they'll just use heavy weapons and they'll level large parts of Aleppo, and the world will say, "Isn't this horrible?" But that's it. The world will say, "Isn't this horrible?"
Another condemnation. Quite. I mean, Reuters is reporting today, as we were talking about arming the rebels, that Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Qatar have actually set up a base now to arm the rebels. Is that getting more organised? Is this the way forward, though? Should we be flooding Syria with arms? I mean, does this surely not
Well,
just
the main question
it?
is whether the opposition can win on the ground. And the answer is probably no. So no matter how many help they get, it's probably not going to work against a regular army with not only tanks but also attack helicopters and jet fighters and the rest of it. It's probably not going to be enough.
And what you've got to see is an uprising within the army. This is what the spokeswoman for the National Council was trying to suggest. You've got to see the army rising up. That's why Manaf Tlass might be interesting, because he's a general. He isn't speaking for the rebels. He's speaking to the army when he speaks, saying, "Join me." But if that doesn't happen, it is going to be a very long fight.
And just going back to the SNC as well, she was also pretty put out when I suggested that elements of Al-Qaeda were becoming stronger and stronger within Syria right now.
Well, I think what the opposition is afraid of is that the whole opposition will be branded as an Al-Qaeda front, which it certainly is not. So they want to make the point that these are small groups, that these are isolated jihadists that are trying to take up the cause. But what they all understand perfectly well is that if this war goes on for very long, it's the hardest people, the nastiest people who continue fighting in that situation. It'll be the jihadists who take over the mantle of the rebellion. And that really is what terrifies them. So they don't want to give the jihadists too much credit now, but they're really very concerned that if this goes on, and it is going to go on, the jihadists will become more powerful in the ranks.
So is that it then for international diplomacy? Is there nothing more that can be done following that?
I don't see much happening in terms of international diplomacy because we all have different agendas anyway. I would say that basically the West used up, the NATO and the West used up their sort of resources with Libya. And that, we've had a taste of what it's like to intervene somewhere. And there's a sort of, even though the intervention in Libya was, when looking back in retrospect, was not too difficult and achieved its goals, they look very hollow. France finds herself in her backyard with now ACME in northern Mali, and that's only because Libya went the way it did. And so there's a feeling of unintended consequences, which is a wisdom that one should always have about the Middle East, that will, I think, prevent the West to intervene for quite a long time.
Yeah, well, I think NATO lost its credibility in Libya because you had Rasmussen here on your station in September repeating about 25 times in 10 minutes protecting civilians when it was absolutely clear they were giving air support for ground attacks against Gaddafi's forces. Yeah. And that's what Russia and China are pointing out. They've lost completely their credibility. Any getting involved in Syria, and the story of Libya is not over yet, but we're not going to go there tonight, but just the same, the potential for disaster is enormous.
Well, having sung the song of disaster quite a bit tonight, let me just say that there is a chance, especially depending on what the Turks decide to do, that this fight in Aleppo will open up a kind of safe haven in Syria for the rebellion. If you look at the map, you look at the topography, a lot of these towns where there's been fighting in northern Syria are on what is essentially a flat expanse that runs all the way to the Turkish border. If they can open that up for resupply to Aleppo, and if Aleppo by some
But they're worried, aren't they, about the Kurdish element there as well? So it's
that's what they want. That's what they want to try to do, but I don't think they can do it.
All right, okay, well, let's move on to our next topic. It's been another busy week for the Eurozone. Debt collectors arrived in Greece to scrutinise the nation's books. Politicians must prove they have a credible plan to save €11.5 billion over the next 2 years. If not, they could risk losing the next round of crucial bailout funds. EU Commission Chief Jose Manuel Barroso jetted in personally to make sure the Greeks were making good on their promises to get their house in order.
The main issue is implementation to deliver results. To maintain the trust of European and international partners, the delays must end. Words are not enough. Actions are much more important.
Meanwhile, investors had another worry, and that's the rising cost of borrowing for Spain and Italy, economies that dwarf the Greek economy. But the ECB chief, Mario Draghi, told them exactly what they wanted to hear.
Within our mandate, the ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro. And believe me, it will be enough.
Well, hints that the ECB could start buying up more debt, sent European stocks and the single currency higher. Christopher, with borrowing costs at record levels for Spain and Italy, one might ask why the ECB didn't step in a little bit sooner.
There's a one-word answer: Germany. That's why they didn't step in, because the Germans are against it. I mean, the Bundesbank already has come out and said after Draghi's remarks, well, and we're not really on board with this. We don't want to do this. So Draghi's going out a little bit on a limb, but I think he's got to do it, and the Germans, I think, are going to have to give in. But this has been the problem again and again and again. The Germans do eventually give in, but they wait until it's too late. And that's why your question is exactly on the money, as it were. It should have been done before. All of this should have been done before. But nobody is willing to make the commitment that's big enough, soon enough, to really end the crisis, if indeed it is possible, but to make the crisis at least a little bit more livable.
And the other worry, of course, is Greece and whether or not it can pay back its debts. We've just heard earlier this week that the economy is set to shrink at a whopping 7% this year. I mean, it's difficult to see where they're going to find this money.
I don't think they can find most of it. But on the other hand, even though it looks like large amounts of money, it is something that could be absorbed entirely by the European economies. So in effect, I think the markets have already discounted the Greek debt entirely, and they feel that, okay, we can go on even if these people default on their debt. What is probably worrying Germany is that Moody's issued this warning on Germany losing its AAA rating, and that's because of the Eurozone. And there are two ways of looking at this in Germany, and one of them is saying, we can't do this, and therefore but they can't very well, the first reaction is, it's their fault, we don't want to be part of this, and the second, of course, is the remedy would be worse than the ill that is trying to remedy it, and that Germany cannot say, well, we're walking out away from the euro, because that's impossible, it breaks the economy, and the costs of leaving the euro, breaking up the euro altogether, are much too high. And I think there's a real commitment when you get out of politics, because all of this is on a background of domestic politics in Germany, and it doesn't play very well. This is why they're being so slow in reacting. But I think at the end of the day, it's a stark warning to Germany that they're in this, and they have to move fast. Moving fast for the German being asked to lend money is always a complicated proposition.
Patrick, what's your take on the Eurozone? Are we in any better position today than we were, say, 6 months ago?
Well, what happened yesterday with the ECB president's comments could be a turning point, because what he is saying now is basically that the central bank is ready to purchase bonds. How they're going to do it, it remains to be seen. What was interesting is when he said so yesterday, market shares went up. And today, Germany expressed criticism, and they went down again. So it's the markets are still very nervous. But then again, the markets regard the ECB as the only institution capable of acting quickly and effectively enough to actually stop the rot. So there may be a ray of hope there.
All right, quick word on the Eurozone before we go to break, George.
Well, I'm just tired of bashing the Germans because they have a good economy, work hard, and pay in cash. It really makes me very angry. The Germans didn't want the Greeks, the Spanish, and the Italians and the Portuguese in the euro in the first place. The French insisted. And I'm afraid France is going to be where Spain and Italy are now in about 2 years' time. And so France has every interest in trying to get euro bonds. I mean, we know that we've known for years that the treasury is empty, and Fillon has to find 40 billion euros next year. We just have to stop bashing the Germans and maybe learn from them.
All right, stop bashing the Germans. Let's have a quick break. When we come back, we'll have the international headlines and the second part of The World This Week. Don't go away.